All right, hello everybody. I'm John Walker with Lyft. First, I'd like to just thank everyone for welcoming another delegation of Americans to Canada. I know it didn't go so hot last week, so hopefully we can repair some of that. But in all seriousness, I do want to say, Silicon Valley is still very, loves working with Canada. And personally at Lyft, we've been very well received by the folks of Canada and appreciate that. So on to a non-controversial topic. Rideshare and public transit. So this should help. So I'm going to talk about the end of the status quo and why that's a good thing, why this disruption is a good thing. And if we can work together, we can actually harness the disruption and remake our cities for the better. So we know what cities looked like before Lyft and before Uber, right? We know how things were going. We know how our transportation system was. And we all know that this is what New York City looked like before TNCs. We were growing vegetables in the middle of it, and there's the light rail and segways everywhere. So it was a kind of a utopic thing. I don't know why you would eat food off of Midtown Manhattan, but I guess these people are doing that. But in all seriousness, we know what life was like before TNCs. This is actual New York City in 2012 before TNCs arrived. And we knew that some of the problems that are happening in New York City were going to happen before they happened. And this is from an article at that time, and it says, Manhattan's looming traffic problem. Traffic congestion set to worsen as, among other things, MTA delays and funding gaps persist. So, and I really appreciate the comments by Kevin that, it's about how you integrate these services into your city, and it's about how you invest in transportation that gives you the outcomes you want. So if you do not invest in public transit and you do not invest in people, you're going to get a bad outcome. And we've seen that in New York City where traffic's been rising. And then, of course, in Vancouver, we have, kind of not intentionally, but we have a good control group of an experiment. So there's no ride sharing in Vancouver, and Vancouver, at least when this study was written, had the worst traffic in Canada. So it doesn't magically disappear when you don't have ride sharing. And when we look at the numbers in the United States, it's pretty stark. 86% of Americans commute in a car, 76% by themselves. Only 5% of Americans commute in public transit. And this is a stat from 2012, before rideshare. And then we all know a lot has changed since 2012 in the United States as rideshare has grown very, very large. And this is the pie chart last year. So it's the same. So a lot of hay is made about transportation network companies, rideshare, but really we are less than 1% of all miles in the United States. And so to point out rideshare as a big issue and ignore the 86% of personal cars doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't make any sense to allow a giant vehicle to drive into your downtown for free, a personal car with one person in it, and then tax a shared Lyft ride. That just doesn't make sense. And then we ran the numbers on Canada. Canada's better, so tip of the cap to the TransLinks and the Metrolinks and the other transit folks in Canada. Significantly more Canadians take public transit as their commute, but personal cars still dominate. Still more than 3/4 of Canadians drive a personal car. And this is a huge problem. And I think a lot of us, almost all of us in the room know this is a huge problem, but it's a broken system. These personal vehicles are underutilized. They are expensive in the US, and I would guess Canada as well. It's the second highest expense for a family. In the US, it's the primary expense for a low-income family. So think about that for a second. Low-income folks are spending more money on a car that sits around so that they can get to their job the 4% of the time than they are on food and housing and entertainment and education. It's a major problem. It's dirty, over a gigaton of CO2, NOx, SOx, all the other particulate matter. And it's inefficient. If we have any physicists or engineers in the room, less than 1% of the total system energy actually goes to moving people in a personal car system. That's terrible. And it's a poor use of land. In the US, we have 1 billion parking spaces, and city cores can be up to half parking, which is terrible. These are the most valuable pieces of our city, and we're using them to park two-ton chunks of steel. And it's dangerous. 1 million people in the world are killed in car accidents. 37,000 in the US alone. That's actually ticking up in the United States despite safety improvements in vehicles. And I'll leave you to speculate why. Probably has something to do with distracted driving as more technology is in the hands of drivers. So it's broken. And just to point out the parking thing, we could pave Connecticut with all the parking spaces we have. But something is changing. So Lyft is growing at a staggering rate. I just saw we were the fastest growing company in San Francisco. We're growing at about 40% year over year. And this is actually a really good and exciting thing for cities. And why is that? Because I think a lot of the time we're asking the wrong question. We're asking, what is the impact of TNCs? What is the impact of rideshare? What about this question? What would cities look like if there were no personal cars? Personal cars are not working. As I point out those 6 reasons why a personal car system is broken, what would a city look like if you had no personal cars? And we know a little bit, and Sharon is going to speak on the panel after me, but we know from some previous studies that people who take rideshare, they take transit more, they use other shared mobility modes. What happens is you get into a mobility services paradigm, and you give up that personal car paradigm, because the personal car is like, it's like the all-you-can-eat pizza buffet. You sink $30K in the pizza buffet, you're going to eat pizza all the time, right? You just spent $30,000 on it, right? So, but if you can get into the a la carte system, maybe you'll have a salad and you'll have a sandwich and you can do these different things. And so what I'd be interested in for the researchers out there is let's start thinking about what a city looks like where there are no personal cars, where people are taking transit, where people are carpooling, where people are taking Lyft, where people are walking, biking, et cetera. That's a world that we can all get along with. And what is the pie? I sort of guessed at that pie on the right there. But it doesn't seem unreasonable to me that 25, 50% of ridership could all of a sudden be public transit. And we would love to be serving things that public transit doesn't serve well, feeding public transit, allowing people to walk and bike when they can, allowing people to do other things. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our multimodal app. So don't have any screenshots for you yet, but some of you might have seen an announcement. We are making a major update to our app where our app will display transit and other modes of transit, like potentially bike share. So when you go into the Lyft app, what it will ask you is, where do you want to go? And you put in your destination. And if the best way to get there is a train or a bike share to a bus, it will tell you to take the bike share to the bus, even if that has nothing to do with Lyft. And we do this to try to move people from that left pie to that right pie. We want, I often say Uber is not our competitor. Everybody buying and driving and maintaining a car is our competitor. We're after that huge piece of the pie. We're not after infighting with the other mobility services. We would be thrilled if other mobility services grew. So when you're in the app, you say, I want to go downtown. It'll say, well, take the train. And then you can say, OK, I don't want to take the train. It'll say, take the bike share to the bus. And then it'll say, OK, take a Lyft line. So it's going to give you the best and cheapest way to get to your destination, which is really exciting. And then you'll probably see that roll out in 2018. I've got it on the beta right now, and it's great. And then our next step is integrated payment. So imagine next year you want to go downtown. Not only will it tell you to take bike share to the train, you push the button and it will pay for that, and then maybe it has a Lyft line waiting for you at the station to take you there. One payment, one click. So that's where we're headed. It's really exciting. I think Canada is a fantastic place to pilot some of this functionality. We've had some great conversations with transit folks in Canada and look forward to continuing those. But I want to continue with talking about where we are with personal cars. And so I think this question of what would cities look like without personal cars is a good one. I think another good one that nobody knows the answer to is why did congestion decrease in San Francisco last year? So there's a narrative in San Francisco right now that congestion is terrible, it's through the roof. Oh, it must be because TNCs are growing. It must be because Uber and Lyft are growing, and there are all these mobility things. But when you actually look at data, which is what INREX does, that's just not the case. As Lyft grew 40%, as Lyft was the fastest growing company in San Francisco, congestion actually went down from 2016 to 2017. So let's try to figure out exactly why. I think it's really, really interesting. And I'll just tease something. I got permission to give just a little tease on a new INRIX report coming out that looked at the correlation of Lyft and congestion in major US cities, and the results are looking very good for rideshare. It actually found the bigger reasons that congestion is increasing in other cities is economic improvement, population increase, and some interesting things like in New York City, a few years back, they changed the signal timing to allow pedestrians more time to cross, which is fantastic. That's a great move. We should prioritize pedestrians. But what that did is that actually can increase congestion in downtown Manhattan because it gave less priority to cars, which is totally fine with Lyft. So we need to really think critically about what causes congestion and not just pick an easy lightning rod, political lightning rod. And then my biggest surprise, coming from an environmental think tank to Lyft, is that Lyft line is actually working to get strangers to carpool. In some of our major markets, where almost 40% of requests are Lyft line, and we just announced a goal last week. By 2020, we believe 50% of our rides will be shared rides. 50% of our rides will have more than one passenger by 2020. And when you start to think of that, when you start to think of the norm is now rideshare, the norm is now carpool, that's pretty crazy, and that's where we start to really reduce congestion, reduce costs, and make everybody win. So let's work together to grow shared rides. Let's not tax shared rides. Let's work together to grow the number of people that use them. We have some interesting ideas if city and transit folks are interested in that. And then this, you've probably heard of this. Uber and Lyft are making car cutting the new cord cutting. We are starting to see people selling cars and start to move into the mobility services paradigm. A recent study showed in major US cities up to 20% of people could take Lyft line or Uber pool everywhere, and it would be cheaper than owning and operating a car. And that's going to grow from 20 to 80 when we get to automation. I'll get to that in a minute. But this is where we really start to make some difference. People car cutting, and also young people that move to a city. When I moved to Chicago 10 or 15 years ago, I bought a car because it was still the norm. If I moved to Chicago right now, there's no way I would purchase a car. So folks are delaying car purchases, and I think that sometimes is not captured adequately in the research. So, okay, so I pointed out that we're still less than 1% of miles, and that's true. So how are we going to actually make a huge difference? And this is why we're so interested in automation. You know, I'm a mechanical engineer by training, so robot cars are cool. But the reason we're interested in automation is because it changes the entire equation of our product. All of a sudden, you see the far left bar is the cost of owning and operating a car. The far right bar is the cost of taking automated mobility service. And what you can see is that when we get to automation, we can undercut the cost of a car even in Des Moines, Iowa, not just Midtown Manhattan. And that's when folks are going to start making a very smart choice to give up their car. This is from another study I worked on when I was at Rocky Mountain Institute, where we found that car ownership is going to plummet as automated mobility services take over in the next 5 years. So this is really, really exciting. And the cities that have embraced rideshare and have integrated it properly are going to reap the benefits of this automation technology. So you have to ask yourself, if you're a city or a state or a province, do you want to have automation come in the form of shared rides, that the asset is utilized by your entire population? Even low-income folks, half of our rides are taken by people that make less than $50,000 per year. Or do you want them to be a luxury for the rich who buy a Tesla and send it around to do everything for them? Do you want it to be a luxury for the rich, or do you want it to be a mode of transportation for the public? And that's where ride sharing makes automation work. And we're working pretty hard on automation. We set up our own lab to work on it. And then we're also partnering with the world's leading companies, Waymo, Aptiv, Nutonomy. One thing I want to point out about this is, so we also just announced that every single Lyft ride is carbon neutral. So we are offsetting the carbon of every single Lyft ride. So you can feel good about taking a Lyft ride, that through offsets you are not adding any carbon dioxide to the environment. And furthermore, this is pushing us toward electric vehicles. You'll notice the Waymo vehicle is a plug-in hybrid. The Nutonomy vehicle is an all-electric vehicle. Electric goes with autonomous. They work well together because of operating cost and because of the power demands of the system, et cetera. So when you are making a choice for automated mobility service, you're making a choice toward electric vehicles. And was at the EV 2018 conference in Ottawa recently, and lots of excitement in Canada around this. I'd love to talk to folks here if you're interested about a potential EV pilot in Canada. And then this is what we're planning. We're planning a subscription. You sign up for Lyft Mobility, it completely undercuts the cost of a car, and it makes it a no-brainer. So, got about a minute here, so I want to talk, of course, about what we're talking about today. This is not a silver bullet, the tech. We have to work together. We need to redesign our streets. So this is something that Nelson Nygaard did in Los Angeles. This is a typical street layout in the United States. You put the sidewalks on the side, and you let the cars drive in the middle. It's very inefficient. It's terrible. This is what your street could look like. I know other folks want to go, Musk wants to go under the city. Our friends at different companies want to go over the city. We still think terrestrial land travel has a chance here. If we can redesign our cities, automated buses, automated vehicles, connected buses, bike lanes, we can move 3 times the number of people, add greenery, add bike lanes that are protected, and move people. I'm going to talk about our transit partnerships. So the ones that I think are most pertinent today are first, last mile. So we've done a lot of partnerships where we are taking people to stations. So Kevin showed that the transit-oriented development what if you could expand the radius of transit-oriented development by miles, right? If you have a first last mile system, all of a sudden transit-oriented development is not a little bubble around the station. It can expand further in and allow more and more folks to utilize it. So that's what first last mile is about. It's about expanding usage of the backbone of public transit. The other one I want to talk about is nighttime service. So we do a lot of, we're doing a pilot in Detroit right now where we're taking low-income workers from night jobs home because the transit agency realized it's extremely expensive to run nighttime transit. But we need to give an option to these folks. And what we're doing is we're providing subsidized rides at times that it doesn't make sense to run transit. And I think this speaks to some of the stuff that Sharon Fagan is going to talk about next, but the complementary nature of our two services. Full buses on trunk lines, full trains on trunk lines when it makes sense. Let's think about Lyft as a way to subsidize that, to service other parts of that system. And then just right across the border here, I actually didn't know Kevin used to work at Pierce, but we're doing a partnership with Pierce, and we're giving people easy access to transit, so free rides to the transit system just across the border in Tacoma here. So really exciting stuff. Would love to talk to you other folks about how we can marry our system with public transit. We believe we're additive and can be a big part of the solution. So I'm a little bit over, so I'll stop there. Thank you all very much.